The Druze, without a doubt, are the most secretive sect in the entire history of the Ummah. They identify as muwahhidun. They believe that the Prophet Shu'aib is their ancestor. This is one of the most bizarre realities about the Druze. They do not have any prayer. They do not have any fasting whatsoever. Rather, what they do have is the Druze prove their loyalty to the state of Israel. The IDF adopted the Druze. This is the book of Theology where they're talking about belief in God. There's hardly any quotations of the Quran. The name of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in my reading, I never saw this even once. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Alhamdulillah wahda wa salatu wa salamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da ma ba'd. As you're all aware, it's been quite a while since we have done a library chat, and frankly the reason I think it should be obvious to all of you, there's just so much going on in the world, especially with our brothers and sisters in Gaza. I just frankly felt a little bit demotivated to spend time doing library chats at the same time, and I'm the one also telling people that the seerah teaches us that no matter what is happening, no matter how much our hearts are in pain, we still have to benefit in other ways and continue our da'wah, continue our preaching and teaching. And I recognize this is just, I found it a little bit difficult to do. But nonetheless, no matter what is happening, and our du'as and prayers are with our brothers and sisters around the world, obviously we still have to benefit the ummah continuously in every single way that we can. And in fact, today's library chat actually is relevant to something that is going on currently in the world, even though I will make it such that it is independent of any political events. Recently, a certain group of Islam was in the news, known as the Druze, and I got a number of questions and emails from so many people around the world asking, can you explain to us? I have a number of talks I gave about another group called the Alawis or the Nusayris, and so in light of that, I got a number of emails saying, can you explain to us what exactly are the beliefs of the Druze, and who exactly are the Druze, and how we can help understand, just from a historical and theological perspective, the reality of this group. So this library chat will be about the Druze, and of course it goes without saying, this is a talk about a particular sect. Obviously it's meant for information purposes only, so that you understand better what is going on. I am not advocating any type of action, any type of political violence, astaghfirullah, against innocent people, but I want to explain who these people are, where do they come from, and perhaps a little bit of some of their beliefs and their realities. Also, by the way, interesting point here, the Druze, out of all of the groups that have any relationship with Islam, the Druze, without a doubt, are the most secretive sect in the entire history of the Ummah. Right after the Alawis. The Alawis or the Nusayris, and they're also confused between the two. So today, inshallah, we're going to address this reality. And the Druze are one primary ethnicity, even though they live in 3 or 4 regions of the world, but they really go back to one group of people, I should say. And so they all go back to a group of people who converted to their theology, their ideology, almost 1,000 years ago. All of the Druze of today are biologically the descendants of the group that converted to the initial teachings, as we will come to today. And they number around 1 million, and they are concentrated in the modern day Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Israel. So you have pockets in all of these countries, and then of course from these regions there is a diaspora. A few tens of thousands maybe have gone to Europe and to America, and so there are Druze congregations here in America as well, but they are very, very small. Even in the Muslim world, they probably number 1 million to 1.5 million. This is probably their more realistic the demographics. And the Druze are an Arab-speaking ethnicity, and they are an ethno-religious group, i.e. they are one, as we said, ethnic identity, and they are all descendants of the original group, and they are also a branch of Ismaili Shi'ism. Now, are they still Ismaili or not? Well, yes and no. By origin, they're Ismaili. By history, they're Ismaili. However, they are disconnected from the modern Ismaili movements, as we will say. So, the Druze are birthed by the Ismailis of old, but in reality they are now fully independent and they don't have anything to do with the actual modern Ismailiya movements, as we will discuss today. Now we will call them the Druze, but you should understand that they identify as muwahhidun, as the people of Tawheed, the people of monotheism, and they have a affiliation with especially the Prophet Shu'aib, and they believe that the Prophet Shu'aib is their ancestor and one of their main spiritual founders. So in today's brief library chat, and of course this must be brief because there's so much that can be said about this movement. In today's library chat, I want to divide the talk into 4 different parts. Number 1, the history of the Druze up until modernity, very quickly. Number 2, a little bit of their theology and rituals and their how they conduct themselves in their daily lives. Number 3, the main book that they have called Rasailul Hikmah. And then number 4, the differences between the Druze and the Nusayris or the Alawis, so they understand what are these 2 firqas of Islam. So let us begin. The history of the Druze. The Druze, they began in the 11th century CE. 400s of the Hijrah, and they began within the Fatimid Empire, the Fatimid Khilafah. Now, of course, the Fatimid caliphs, the Fatimid Empire, of course, the Fatimids were the Ismaili branch of Islam, and of course, the Ismaili branch, as you should all be aware, the Ismaili branch, they split from the 12er branch after Ja'far al-Sadiq. Ja'far al-Sadiq had a number of sons. The eldest one was Ismail, and then a younger brother was Musa al-Kadhim. So the 12er Shia, they consider Ismail, they consider Ja'far al-Sadiq to be the 6th Imam, and he passed down to the 7th Imam, Musa al-Kadhim, not Ismail. So that is the 12er branch of Shi'ism. As for the Ismaili branch of Shi'ism, they feel that the Imamate passed from Ja'far al-Sadiq down to the elder brother Ismail. Now Ismail died in the lifetime of his father, and he left very small children. So when he died in the lifetime of his father, so then his brother assumed the political and the theological imamate after their father. So the bulk of Shi'ism followed Musa al-Kadhim. However, a small group known as Ismailis broke away, and from them a number of branches came out. In early Islam, there were 2 branches of Ismaili Shi'ism that are famous, and these are the Fatimids and the Qaramita, or the Karamatians, the Qaramita. The Qaramita were the infamous branch of Islam that attacked the Kaaba, stole the Hajar Aswad, built another Kaaba in Bahrain. They took the Hajar Aswad and they took it to Bahrain to install in that fake Kaaba. They were the ones who massacred the Hujjaj and filled the well of Zamzam with the bodies of the Hujjaj. And I have talked about this story in a number of lectures I have given. The Qaramita were not the same as the Fatimid dynasty theologically and ritualistically, but they were also from the same branch of Ismailism, even though they were very different from Fatimid Islam. And the Qaramita do not have any remnants left in modern Islam. The Qaramita had their mini dynasty, they had their mini kingdoms, and in fact they have not left a single trace. In fact, it is very difficult to even find any treaties left from the Qaramita. So the Qaramita, we know about them historically. We kind of sort of know a little bit of what they believe by what their enemies have said, but they themselves, they did not leave a heritage by and large, even though I have been told that there are some physical remnants of their kingdom in that region of Bahrain. So the Qaramita are basically completely gone. Now, the Fatimids, of course, established their dynasty. They began in North Africa, they began in Tunisia, in Mahdiya, they made their way all the way through Algeria, and then they conquered Egypt, and then they established Al-Qahira. Al-Qahira was established by the Fatimids, and they built Al-Azhar University. Now, because the Fatimids were a mighty empire, and they ruled for 200-300 years until Salah ad-Din Ayyubi brought about the end of the Fatimid dynasty, because the Fatimids established an actual dynasty and ruled an entire kingdom, obviously they were able to do much more. And from the Fatimids branched out a number of Ismaili sects or firqas, 3 of which we still have to this day. So the Fatimids split into many different sub-branches of Ismailism, and we still have all, to this day we have 3 of them. The first of these are the Nizaris. And the Nizaris are also called the Aga Khanis. And this is the only branch of Shi'ism in which the Imam is still recognizable and living amongst them. And so this is the Nizari or the Aga Khani branch of the Fatimids. The second is the Bohra. and the Buhra do not have a they do not have a visible Imam, and they have a representative of the Imam whom they call a Da'i al-Mutlaq. And then the third branch that broke away from the Fatimids were the Druze. So the Nizaris or the Aga Khanis, the Buhra and the Druze. These are the three branches that broke away from the Fatimid dynasty, branch of Ismaili Shi'ism. And these are the three that have some relationship with Ismailism. Of the three, the Nizaris and the Buhra call themselves Ismaili. As for the Druze, they do not call themselves Ismaili. As I said, technically speaking, even though the Druze are Ismaili in origin, and they are Ismaili historically, pragmatically, or I should say, in the current climate, in the current time frame, they do not identify as Ismaili, and they don't really have a notion of them being Ismaili. In fact, as we're going to come to, they do not even identify as Muslims, and they consider Islam to be like Christianity and Judaism, which were, past manifestations of Allah's revelation, and they have the real manifestation. So in fact, the Druze do not even identify by and large as Muslim, and they view themselves as being a distinct ethnic and religious minority, not under Islam, much less under Ismailism. So when people say the Druze are one of the branches of the Ismailis, technically it is correct, and yet still it should be qualified, as I explained. Now, before I go on with the Druze, one of the important aspects of Fatimid theology that you should be aware of, because again, the Fatimid theology are the Aga Khanis and the Buhra and the Druze. All three of these sects, all three of these groups, their theology about God and about cosmology and about eschatology and about hereafter are very different than the beliefs of other Muslims of the Ummah. Why? Well, the Fatimids early on adapted the notions of Neoplatonic thought, and in particular the teachings of a very famous intellectual historian, sorry, not a historian, an intellectual philosopher by the name of Plotinus. And Plotinus lived from 204 to 270 CE, i.e. after Jesus by 200 years. This is before the coming of the Prophet by 300 years. Plotinus is the founder of Neoplatonism. So he took the ideas of Plato and he gave them new vigor, reinterpreted them. This is called Neoplatonic thought. And when the average Muslim, any firqa, whether they're 12 or Shia, whether they're Mu'tazili, whether they're Sunni Ash'ari, Sunni Athari, whether they're Ibadi, any of the what I would call mainstream branches that have passed the bar of salvation, as I continue to say, any of those branches, when they study Druzi theology, when they study Nizari theology, from their perspective, it is not recognizable. They don't understand. It's something really, frankly, alien to the other traditions that they are accustomed to. And the reason for this is because the other groups of Islam, by and large, did not adopt Neoplatonism. They adopted either Kalam, and then Kalam has many sub-branches underneath it, or they rejected Kalam and they adopted a type of literalism called Atharism or Tafwid, whatever it is. So that spectrum is the spectrum that most academic Muslims, most people that are engaged in ilm and talib al-ilm, they are familiar with. Very few people from that circle actually delve in and study Neoplatonic thought, and when they do, it is typically done just as a brief, a foray into, let's say, Ibn Sina, because Ibn Sina was also, of this type of branch, and some say he was Ismaili as well. There's actually a big controversy about whether he was actually Ismaili or whether he was just a pure up and through Neoplatonist without necessarily being Ismaili. But without a doubt, Ibn Sina's thoughts resonated more with the Ismailis than they would his theology than it would with Sunnism. So who was Plotinus and what was his theology? That is a very interesting talk. We don't have time to go into it today, but very quickly, Neoplatonism articulated a profoundly spiritual / metaphysical system, and they have this notion of God being the one, capital O, the one. And by the one, they literally mean the concept of oneness, the absolute ideal of one, that the transcendence of existence. And so for Plotinus, God, or the one, is beyond even being. This is Plotinus. He is beyond being. Forget, he's not even existence, he's beyond existence. His existence is not like our existence. And he is in fact beyond intellect, beyond words. He is utterly simple, absolutely one. He is one in the concept, right? It cannot be described. It cannot be grasped by language or by thought. So then how did this world come about? Well, from the one emanates, and this is the concept of Neoplatonism, emanates. So imagine the sun giving light, right? The sun does not intend to create light, but because the sun is the sun will automatically give light. The sun, because it is the sun, it gives light. Or imagine, if you like, a river flowing down multiple tiers. Let's say that, there's a river, and then there's, rocks that are just going multiple tiers, right? Let's just say, or there's a stream, from them there's a tributary going, and that tributary goes under different rocks. So the concept of the concept of emanation can kind of sort of be described as, well, the river is flowing, and it cannot help it that when the tributary is there, a part of it is simply going to go and automatically be emanated or be found in a different way, and from them another tributary, from them another tributary. This is I'm being very simplistic, but this is the concept of emanation. So from the one, automatically an emanation occurred. That emanation is the first creation, and that first creation is called the aql. And from the aql then comes the next creation, which is the forms. From the nous comes the souls, and so on and forth until you get to the material world. And of course, this is the whole point, is that there is a whole series of emanations, and each strand of Neoplatonic thought had a different number and a different labeling of these, and a different conception of this cosmology. But in the end of the day, all you need to understand is that the God of the Neoplatonists is not quite the God of the people who believe in an active God that is aware, that is involved in your life. It's a different type of God. It's a God more that is just his existence is basically there. It's not as if he knows who you are. It's not as if he's involved in your life. Rather, it's just he cannot help but emanate, and from that emanation a series of things happens, and from those series of things here we are. And that's why, again, if you know your Ibn Sina, the reason why our scholars found Ibn Sina problematic is basically because he's espousing Neoplatonic thought. And when you translate Neoplatonic thought into the language of the average layperson, frankly, it is blasphemy, it is kufr. So again, the notion being that God would not know who you are, because who are you so that God should know you? God is really above that type of description. God is not active in your life. God is not, your prayers don't really affect and impact you. It might make you feel good, but the God of the Neoplatonists, the God of the Falasifa, is not an Abrahamic God, if you understand what I'm saying here. It's more like akin to a force. And so this is what Plotinus taught. Now again, this is all Plotinus here. The ideas of Plotinus were translated into Arabic in this time frame, in the 2nd and 3rd century of the Hijrah, i.e. around 1000 CE, and the Fatimid courts adopted those teachings, and they took philosophers such as Al-Kirmani and others, and these philosophers were the court philosophers, and these philosophers were the ones who wrote the Ismaili treatises that are studied to this day. If you want to study Nizari thought, if you want to study any Ismaili thought, you will go back to writings that were composed primarily in the time of the Fatimids, and they are directly tapping into Neoplatonic thought. So once you understand this, now you have to understand this is where Druze ideology is coming from. Druze ideology is not tapping into the Abrahamic notion of God. Rather, it's tapping into the Plotinus notion of the one, the one creates the aql, the way, because that's a big no-no for them. No, there is no actual creation. There is no a desire to create. There is no kun fayakun. No, it's an emanation. It just happens because that is what God is. And from those emanations, a series of emanations occurs, because even the aql does not actually create. It also emanates until finally there's a trickling down, until finally the very final emanation is the world as we know it. Along the way, one of the emanations are the souls of mankind, and so the souls of mankind do have a higher, if you like, hierarchy in the divine scale of things, as we will come back to. So with that prelude, let's get back to the Fatimid Empire. So the Fatimid Empire had a series of imams. For the Nizaris and the Buhra, pretty much the first batch of imams of the Fatimids are their imams. And then between the Buhra and the Ismailis, there was a split that occurred between two of the Imams of the Fatimids. And so you had Musta'li and the Buhras took on the Musta'li, and then you had the Nizar, and Nizaris became the Aga Khanis. So the Nizaris and the Musta'lis, there were two brothers, and from these two brethren, the Aga Khanis and the Buhra broke away. Before this happened, there was another ruler by the name of Al-Hakim bi Amrillah. So Al-Hakim bi Amrillah, from his time, the first split occurred, known as the Druze. Afterwards, the Nizaris and the Buhra, they split away, and they then formed two groups. Before them, Al-Hakim bi Amrillah, in the year 1021 he passed away, 1021 he passed away. And Al-Hakim bi Amrillah was one of the longest rulers of the Fatimids. He lived for quite a while, and Al-Hakim is considered to be an imam by both the Buhra and by the Nizaris or the Aga Khanis. So Al-Hakim is considered one of the divinely appointed imams. As for the Druze, Al-Hakim becomes a central figure far more than the imam. So understand this point here. Now, Al-Hakim bi Amrillah was one of the most interesting, controversial and eccentric figures in all of Islamic history. And his reign was marked both by intriguing reforms and also extreme autocratic and tyrannical tendencies. And Al-Hakim remains one of the most bizarre rulers that when you study him, you just scratch your head. What was he drinking or thinking or smoking for him to make these bizarre claims? Al-Hakim, for example, one period of time, he closed all the shops during the day, and he forced them to stay awake all night. And so people would stay at home all day by order of royal decree, and then they would go shopping for their goods at night for a period of time. Al-Hakim also ordered a decree to prohibit women from exiting the house at all. Women could not go out at all. They had to stay at home. He would have eccentric, he would literally change every few weeks, have some bizarre ruling, and told his followers to do very strange things. For example, one year, he forbade mulukhiyya, and for the Egyptians to not have mulukhiyya, that is a big problem. For the non-Egyptians, it might not be that big of a problem, but that's another topic altogether. But can you believe the ruler of Egypt, Al-Hakim bi Amrillah, forbade mulukhiyya? He forbade the eating of grapes in certain seasons. So he had this really eccentric, bizarre tendency. He also would do blasphemous things in public, and I don't want to say some of these things is a bit very awkward, but you can imagine when you have unchecked power, really there was a kind of a screw loose in his head, if you like, during his time frame. Now, during his time frame, when he was the Khalifa, and these eccentric powers are becoming even more bizarre, and the people are very disgruntled against him. Nobody liked him when he was alive. Nobody liked him, So what happened? Well, during his lifetime, a group of radical Ismaili thinkers, and in particular 3 people are mentioned. Number 1, Hamza ibn Ismail, and he was from Persia, Farisi. Number 2, Ismail at-Tamimi, and they say he was Arab. And number 3, a Turkish person by the name of Nashtakin. And Nashtakin used to be a tailor. These 3 people, they began forming a new theology. And they began to say that Al-Hakim, he wasn't just the ruler or the Khalifa, which is what the Sunnis of Egypt were forced to say, that he's our Khalifa. The Sunnis, there were Sunnis in Egypt, and the Sunnis said, well, he's our Khalifa. The Ismaili said he is our Imam. But these guys come along now. In particular, Hamza ibn Ismail is probably the founder, and Hamza ibn Ali, and Ismail and Nashtakin were probably his followers, because we don't know too much details of what each one said. But these 3 individuals were all contemporaneous. They're all preaching this ideology, and what they began saying is that Al-Hakim bi Amrillah is not just a Khalifa, he is not just an Imam, but rather he is the divinization of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a manifestation of Al-Haq. And in fact, he is Allah impersonified, or to be more precise, this is the tajalli of Allah. We're going to come back to what this point means. And they also began preaching that the tanzeel has been made mansukh. What this means, the Quran has been made mansukh. And as their call began to grow, they began sending du'at in other places as well, so that people start believing that Al-Hakim is Allah's manifestation on earth, and Sharia no longer has to be followed here. Now, The Ismailis of this time frame, a lot of people don't understand this point. The Ismailis of this time frame were not like the Nizaris of today. The Ismailis in the time of the Fatimids, they fasted Ramadan, they prayed Salah, and they had the rituals of Islam. The Qaramita, the non-Ismaili Fatimids, they're the ones who abolished the Sharia, and they had no Sharia, they had no halal and haram. The Fatimids, by and large, did have a version of fiqh and a version of rituals that we would recognize as non-Ismaili Muslims. We are Muslims of a Sunni background. We would recognize the Salah and the Adhan and the Siyam, just like the Buhra of today. We recognize that they pray and they fast and they have rituals that are recognizable to us. Their women wear the veil, they cover. That this is how the Fatimids were. However, both the Nizari, the Al-Khanis later on, and the Druze at this time, they broke away from this version and they embraced what the Qaramita had done, which is an abolishment of the Sharia. That the Sharia no longer has to be applied because it has now been abrogated, and we can metaphorically interpret everything in the Quran via what they called ta'wil. So what they said was that the Quran has a zahir and a batin. And the zahir, this is what the literalists of the Sunnis, of the ritualists understand, and we know the batin, we know the haqiqah. And because we know the haqiqah, we do not have to pray the way these people pray. We do not have to fast the way these people fast. And so this group of the core founders of the movement, they began preaching this ideology. Now, note here, Al-Hakim was still alive. Al-Hakim was still alive when this is going on. And it appears that the most effective preacher was Nashtakin, the Turkish guy. Nashtakin, who was a tailor. And being a tailor, in that language, it was called Ad-Darazi. Ad-Darazi. And if you speak Urdu or Persian, you understand Ad-Darzi. Ad-Darazi. This is what he was called, Nashtakin Ad-Darazi. And because Nashtakin was the most effective in converting people, the other people began referring to the converts of this movement as the followers of the tailor, Ad-Daraziyin or Ad-Daraziyun. The followers of the tailor, these are Ad-Daraziyun. And from Ad-Daraziyun, we get the phrase the Druze. The Druze comes from Ad-Daraziyun. And of course, Nashtakin was not even the founder, but it appears he was the most effective preacher of the movement. Now, these three people, they would preach in Cairo in various masajid, and their main leader Hamza actually took over one of the masjids outside of Qahira, which would be the base of the Darazi or the Druze. I'm calling it now Druze, even though Hamza himself never called the Druze. You understand this point here? They call themselves people of Tawheed and Muwahidun. So they had a masjid outside of Qahira that became their base. It is mentioned in the books of history that Nashtakin one day, while he was preaching in Cairo, that he began uttering those blasphemies, that Al-Hakim bi Amrillah is tajalli of God, that he is God on earth, or however he phrased it. He would not say God on earth, but that is basically the impression that people would get. And so he was attacked by the crowds for being blasphemous, and he had to flee to the palace for protection. And the mobs then went to the masjid where Hamza was preaching, and they surrounded the masjid. And Hamza issued a plea to the Khalifa to come and save and help him. And so Hamza was also brought to the palace. And so these individuals who were preaching this bizarre theology were sheltered directly by Al-Hakim bi Amrillah in his palace. And after a while, Al-Hakim came out and said, I have caused all of these people to repent. They are no longer preaching these views. However, this is where most other people say that Al-Hakim had to do this in order to placate the crowds. In reality, he did not do anything to stop these teachings when he was alive. While he is alive, all of this preaching is going on. And in fact, it does appear that he didn't even punish them at all, and in fact, perhaps gave them safe passage to flee or run away. We don't even know what happened to Nashtakin and where he went, but it does not appear that Al-Hakim was serious in shutting down this type of bizarre theology about him. Shortly after this, Al-Hakim bi Amrillah mysteriously disappears. Believe it or not, he literally was on a donkey, and in the middle of the night he told his guards, let him be, do not follow him. So he walked out of the palace, he walked out of the city of Cairo, or he trotted on his donkey, and he was never seen again. To this day, nobody knows what happened to him. Did he want to disappear? Did somebody chance upon him and say, oh my God, this is the crazy guy, let's just get rid of him? Whatever it was, he was never seen again. And so with the end of Al-Hakim bi Amrillah, the ideologies of the Druze were then banned in Qahira. And these three individuals were made to disappear. Now, did they flee or were they killed? Again, lots of theories and rumors here, but they were not allowed to preach publicly in Qahira after the disappearance of Al-Hakim bi-Amrillah. And so, within a few years, to be more precise, in the year 1043 CE, the leaders of the movement decided to shut the doors of preaching permanently. No more converts, and nobody would be allowed to convert to their ideology. And so, from the year 1043 CE, which is quite literally almost 1,000 years ago, nobody has converted to this ideology. The people that are following this ideology now are the biological descendants of the first batches of converts who converted from the year 1017 to 1043. Just 30 years of preaching, that's it. So batches of people converted. The founder Hamza and his two emissaries would go out and preach, and they would send emissaries to other lands. And one of those emissaries went to what is now Lebanon, went to a mountain that is now called Jabal Druze. It wasn't called Jabal Druze back then. And groups of people in that region converted to this ideology. In all likelihood, they were not Muslims when they converted. In all likelihood, they were following other religions. Some say Christianity, some say other Gnostic faith traditions. So groups of people in this region converted while Hamza was alive, and there is correspondence between them. Now, Al-Hakim disappears. The founders in Qahira also basically disappear. There's no longer preaching in Qahira, and in fact, the Druze of Qahira seem to have been eliminated or forced to convert back to Ismailism. There is no more mention of the Druze inside of Qahira. So, the Druze of Qahira no longer exist. Where do they exist? Well, those people who converted in the Levant region in Lebanon, their descendants remained Druze for 1,000 years. And all of the Druze of the world today, all of them, they trace their lineage back to basically those first batch of converts over 1,000 years ago, because as a faith tradition, this group does not allow converts. You cannot convert out, nor can you convert in. It is a closed group. You must be born into the group to be a member of the group. And the group, of course, it only remained, as we said, in southern Lebanon, but of course the pockets did migrate here and there, and that is why they are currently in areas of modern Palestine/Israel, areas of Jordan, and areas of Syria. So there is that region, which is basically their region. In some pockets they are the predominant majority, and others they live side by side with the Sunnis and the Shia of that region. And throughout the course of the next 1,000 years, by and large, they remained geographically in one region. Because they're not converting others, because they're not sending people out to preach, they do not increase in numbers dramatically. Rather, it is basically one area where their biological descendants, they intermarry amongst themselves, and they remained isolated. They did not intermingle too much with the surrounding time frame, and that period of history, it's difficult to reconstruct because their own historians are not known to us until the advent of modernity. Of course, there are references throughout history of travelers coming across them. There are references of Muslim empires engaging with them, because a lot of them were bandits and robbers. A lot of them lived off of highway robbery, and so they were considered to be troublemakers by most of the sultans and the rulers, including the Ottomans. There were many skirmishes that took place, but by and large, they were let to live separately. Don't interfere with us, we will not interfere with you. And especially in the Ottoman time frame, the Ottoman sultans basically, almost unofficially, they gave them a complete degree of autonomy, of basically do as you please, don't bother us, and don't ask too many questions, and we're not gonna bother you. And a number of mini dynasties took place amongst them, until finally the advent of modernity and colonization. And of course, with the coming of colonization, now you cannot have a semi-autonomous group of people living in the middle of nowhere. And therefore, in the 20th century, the Druze population had to navigate the challenges of the formation of the nation state. And this is where there is now, for almost the first time in their history, there is a type of involvement with the broader world. And in Syria, they actually in the beginning, they actually played a nominal role in anti-colonial resistance. And so there were some people that actually sided with their fellow Arabs against the colonizers. And you had people like the name of, Sultan Atrash, who was very prominent in the Syrian revolt against the French. And perhaps the most famous leader of the Druze, and this is a name that I know my English-speaking audience would not really have heard of that much, but he is a household name amongst the intellectuals of the Arabs. The Arabs know this name and they've heard of him. 100 years ago, he was an actual household name amongst the Arabs. These days, only the historians and the people who read have heard his name. But 100 years ago, he was a legendary man amongst all of the Arabs, Sunni and non-Sunni, and his name is Shaykh Arsalan. Shaykh Arsalan, who died 1946. And Shaykh Arsalan was a very prominent intellectual of the Druze, an Arab nationalist and a political thinker from Lebanon. And he was, his title is the Prince of Eloquence. He was educated in Beirut, and he interacted with Jamaluddin Afghani, with Muhammad Abdu, and he became one of the main leaders of the notion of pan-Islamism, coming together and fighting colonization. And he was a fierce critic of Western imperialism. And in fact, a lot of people say that he converted to Sunnism. Without a doubt, towards the end of his life, he began to pray, he began to fast. So we hope, inshallah ta'ala, that he converted Sunni, even though technically he never formally announced anything. He was born into a Druze family, and he, never seemed to have disassociated. Everybody knew he was Druze. And at the time, in the 1940s and 30s, I mean, when you're fighting the French and whatnot, all of the Arabs were basically coming together to fight against the colonizers. And so Shaykh Arsalan became one of the most famous ambassadors of this pan-Islamism movement. He would travel across Europe. He wrote many treatises. One of the most famous ones is called Our Decline, Its Causes and Remedies. And he was a journalist, he was an intellectual, he was a historian, he was a thinker. He really was a mover and shaker. Just Google him and you will find a lot of stuff about him and his legacy, and he inspired tens of thousands of people. So this is a person that probably is the most famous Druze pre-modernity. Of course, during the last 50 years, a number of famous Druze have also participated in the public sphere. The Jumbulat family, Walid Jumbulat and Walid Kamal Jumbulat, his father, they were central in Lebanon civil wars. Everybody knows them. Now, when the State of Israel was founded, initially there was a hostility between the Jewish settlers, the colonizers, the Zionists, and between the first batch of Druze they encountered. But they immediately discovered that the Druze do not like the Sunnis, they don't like the Shia, they're kind of sort of on their own. And so a small truce was enacted. This is in the 30s and 40s between the Druze and between the Zionist settlers. And in fact, during the Arab revolt, when the Arabs tried to defend themselves, the Druze did not get involved in that defense, and the Druze did not help the Arabs. And the Zionist settlers saw this, and they appreciated the fact that the Druze were neutral in this regard, and therefore this opened up a door of communication between the land of Israel and between the Druze. And what happened therefore was that the Israeli government back in the 50s, they decided to give the Druze a chance, and so they began conscripting Druze men to work in the army. So it's a job, because realize, to be in the army for people that don't have any education, don't have any technical skills, this is a career and a job. And so they allowed the Druze men to enter into the army. Now, of course, Druze women can also enter, but back then it was only the men. And within 10-15 years, the Druze proved their loyalty to the State of Israel against their fellow Arabs. And so the IDF adopted the Druze, and the IDF made a number of their entire regiments composed of Druze, and they began to rise up until they became generals. And of course, this entrenched the Druze more into Israeli society than of course into Arab society, and that remains the case until this day. And of course, the reason why this library is happening, of course, if you're watching this the year it was released, you all know why, and that is because of the skirmishes taking place right now, or a few weeks ago, last week, between Israeli forces and between the Druze of Syria, because some skirmish took place, and the Druze of Syria, the Druze inside the nation state of Syria, reached out and called the Israelis and said, help us, against our own government. And so Israel bombed Syrian sites, and Israel invaded, and Israel helped the Druze that were actually on the Syrian side of the border. And this is, of course, why I'm giving this library test, so I understand who the Druze are. And of course, historically speaking, the Druze have lived mostly peacefully alongside their Sunni neighbors in Syria and the Levant. And before and during even the civil war, Sunnis lived alongside Druze in Saweda and other places in southern Syria. Nonetheless, one of the tactics that Israel is using is the tactic of divide and conquer, and we cannot fall for that tactic. There are people from within the Druze community that are standing up against this type of tactic and are actually siding with their Sunni Arab brethren against the Israeli onslaught. So we have to be careful and not paint all of the Druze with one simplistic brush. Also, it needs to be pointed out that while some of the Druze do try to ingratiate themselves within Israeli society, the fact of the matter is that they are treated as second-class citizens even within Israel. So even that tactic is not working for them. That is their brief history of the Druze. Let's now move on to their theology. I know this is going to sound strange, and I know that most people will not understand this, and even frankly, I don't know if I understand this, because it's concepts that believing Muslims are just not familiar with. This type of theology is considered foreign to us. It is really stemming from a type of Greek Neoplatonic thought, which really is alien to the theology, we would say, of the Quran. Of course, they have their interpretation, and of course, for us, their interpretation is not stemming from the Quran. Now, from their perspective, they believe that they believe that there are people of pure monotheism. What does that mean? Now remember, for them, monotheism is not what we believe when we say there is one God, that God is to be worshipped, that God is prayed to. The Druze concept of monotheism is that God is transcendent and immanent, that He cannot be described with any attributes. There is no word that can describe God whatsoever. He is the concept of oneness. And so in that, they strip Him of all of His attributes. This is called tanzih. And there are no actual attributes of God. And so the notion of God being described by something, this is not befitting of God. God is the whole of existence, and He is above actual existence. There is no how, there is no when, there is no where, there is nothing characterizing Him. And in this, they are similar to the other Ismaili doctrines as well. However, the Druze believe in something called tajalli. And tajalli, the English term for it is theophany. And tajalli, in its core, in a mystical sense, it refers to the light of God being experienced by the mystics who have reached a high level of purity in their spiritual journey. So, God is perceived as the lahut, the divine, that is manifested in the station, the maqam of the nasut, of the material realm. And the nasut does not become the lahut. So, to give a metaphor here, what a number of Druze say, and Hamza actually writes this in his treatise, is like when you see yourself in the mirror. The mirror is not you, and yet you are in there. So, you are not the mirror, and yet the mirror captures you. So in this, they say, Al-Hakim was that vehicle. Al-Hakim was that entity, that God tajalla. God basically manifested Himself. And technically, they would say that the persona of Hakim is not God. They would say this. But they would say that yet He is manifested in the persona of Al-Hakim. Now, of course, this technical language is lost on almost all of the people, and in reality, the net result is that Al-Hakim is considered to be a walking God. Al-Hakim is viewed to be God on earth, even though in their technical language they would say that Al-Hakim bi amrillah is the one that Allah chose to make tajalli via and through. And they believe that Al-Hakim was the final manifestation. There were previous manifestations before this, but Al-Hakim was the final manifestation, and that in the end of times, Al-Hakim will return back to this earth, and that will then be the final end of this earth. The Druze also have a very bizarre belief for us as Muslims of reincarnation. And reincarnation is a principle of Druze theology. According to them, the souls do not go back to another world. Rather, the souls come back to this world in another body. There is a human soul transferring to another human body. And they believe that the soul of a human can only go to another human. So the reincarnation of the Druze is not like the Buddhists or not like the Hindus. Rather, they believe that the soul of a human only comes back in the body of another human being. And they believe that the cycle of rebirth continues. And the only way to escape is through these successive reincarnations, is when the soul is finally united with the aql, with the cosmic mind, and this achieved ultimate happiness. Now, by the way, if you're seeing a little bit of Buddhism, a little bit of the concept of Hinduism here, of moksha, if you see a little bit of the Gnostic theology here, the reason being all of these ideologies, they go back to Plotinus. All of these ideologies, they are impacted by Plotinus. And so there is this notion of eventually breaking free of the cycle. And when you break free of the cycle, when you rise higher and higher as you keep on coming back to this earth, you live a righteous life as a Druze, you will come back as a better Druze. You live a righteous life, you'll come back as a clerk, as a cleric of the Druze. We'll come to the clerics here. And then eventually you will reach the ultimate state. And that when you reach that state, that is Jannah on earth. In other words, there is no actual heaven and hell the way we believe it as Muslims. No, heaven and hell are states of the mind. According to the Druze, heaven and hell are when you either break away from the cycle or you are permanently cast outside of the cycle because of your bad and sinful life. This is what heaven and hell are. So these are some of the theologies of the Druze. Also, when it comes to rituals, the Druze do not have the regular prayers whatsoever. In fact, they do not have any prayer. They do not have any formal sajda. They do not have any recitation of the Quran. They do not have any fasting whatsoever. They do not have any visiting of Mecca and Medina. This is not at all a part of their terminology, of their rituals. Rather, what they do have is a sanctuary called the Khalwa. They don't call it a masjid. And the Khalwa is visited not on Friday morning, but on Thursday night. The Khalwa is visited on Thursday night, and in that Khalwa, certain rituals and certain chants are done, and this constitutes their actions of worship. And also, one of the main aspects of worship that they do is the visitation of the graves of the people whom they consider to be their founders or their icons, historic graves, and in particular, a grave that they consider to be the grave of Shu'aib alayhi salam. It is not the grave of Shu'aib, and this grave is located in the current country of Israel. And so for them, the holiest of holy places is in fact inside the land of Israel, and they have a pilgrimage that they do to those graves. So for them, for the Druze, there is no recognized rituals the way that we understand, and frankly, venerating the grave and visiting the grave is how the average Druze will do any type of worship. And when they visit the grave, they essentially invoke and pray the person in the grave, because for them this person is a type of manifestation of the divine. So there is no actual reading of the Quran, there is no understanding of the teachings of the Quran, there is no ritual that we do, because for them all of this is ta'wil. We make a Ismaili reinterpretation of what the Quran actually says. Some of the scholars have derived, some of the researchers of the Druze have derived 7 principles that are taught by the Druze, and we'll go over them quickly. Number 1, being truthful in your speech and always speaking the truth with your tongue. Number 2, helping your brethren in faith, helping the Druze in all that they need to do. Number 3, renunciating all other forms of worship and beliefs, rejecting all other religions. Number 4, repudiation of all evil and the devil, and this is called tughyan, so whatever they, just getting rid of all evil. Number 5, belief in Allah's unity, and again we explain what unity is. Number 6, subservience to the commands of Allah, and here they mean subservience to the commands of Al-Hakim, obviously over here. And number 7, absolute submission to the divine will in both secret and in public. So these are 7 precepts that the Druze believe in. They can be summarized basically in being a part of your society and following orders within society and believing in this abstract concept of monotheism. This is really what Druze is all about. Now the Druze also are taught another notion which is well known to all of us, and that is taqiyya. And taqiyya is a developed doctrine by the Shia. The Sunnis don't really have this notion the way that the Shia do, and the 12-verse by and large have pretty much abandoned it in our times, but the Druze still maintain it, and the Druze actively preach it. And so they are taught that They are not allowed to preach their theology to other people. And in fact, now we get to one of the most interesting things about the Druze that hardly any other group has, and that is the following. The Druze are not taught their own faith or theology until the age of 40. This is one of the most bizarre realities about the Druze. If you meet any person from this background under the age of 40, it doesn't matter who they are, they themselves have never been taught. There is no Sunday school. They don't go to the khalawat. They don't go to the temple of worship. Under 40, you are simply a member of their society. You have nothing to do with their books, their theology. You are not taught anything, and you are of the juhal. This is the term they call themselves. This is not me calling them. You are of the juhal. Once you get to the age of 40, then the elders will vet you. And a small group, some have said 15-20%, 1 out of 5, a small group, not the default, will then be chosen, and they will be made the uqqal, the intelligentsia, and they will be initiated into the leadership. And the uqqal are a minority of even those above the age of 40. So chances are, if you ever meet a Druzi, if you ever meet somebody from the Druze, chances are they have never been actually explained their own faith. They have never had access to their own teachings. They have never read their own holy books. And this is how they preserve their identity. It is a cultural identity. If you are a member of that ethno-cultural group, then you have a lot of help. You have your family and friends. You have a lot of camaraderie. You have community. And that for you is your identity. There is no ritual you will attend other than going to the grave. There is no theology you necessarily have to believe in. You just know that you're Druze, and that's about it. When you get to the age of 40, 1 out of 4 or 5 or 1 out of 6 are then going to be chosen. And those 1 out of 5 will then be taught their teachings in secret. They must take an oath, and that oath is to never reveal that secret under penalty of death, and never to talk to other people about the reality of the Druze faith tradition. So that is why I would say, and everybody agrees with this, nothing, this is well known, the Druze really are the most secretive sect of the entire people who have come from Islam. No group is more secretive than them, and to this day minimal research has been done about the Druze. You go look it up yourselves. There's only 2 or 3 books in the English language that have been written. There's not deep analysis, quite rather superficial, and that's for multiple reasons. Of them, it's very difficult to have access to their writings and materials. Of them, the Druze is not as much of a theology as much as it is an ethno-cultural, ethnocentric group. If the average Druze person doesn't even know what he believes, how can somebody outside explain what they believe? There is no actual, belief that they have per se. The average Druze does not know, and they don't care to know. It's fine. It's a society that they're happy doing. Once they get to the age of 40, only 1 out of 5 or 6 or 7 is initiated, and once they're initiated, then obviously they have a very, very big responsibility. They take on leadership roles, and because of this, to have somebody defect is extremely rare. In all of Druze history, very few people have defected and betrayed the community's secrets. You do find every once in a while this does happen. And throughout the course of history, this has happened, which leads me to my third point in the library chat, and that is the writing or the main book of the Druze. Now, in fact, the main writing of the Druze is called the Rasailul Hikmah, the treatises of wisdom, and these Rasail are almost impossible to procure. It is almost impossible to procure them. I say this, and yet here I have these 3 Rasail, 111 Rasail. These are the 3, they're called Rasail al-Hikmah, and maybe one day I'll tell the story of how I got access to them. This is actually a bit dangerous for me to display on here, because technically this has the death penalty to display these or to read them. These are very difficult, very, very difficult to obtain, and the version that I have was actually printed by not even Druze. They were printed by a group of, let's call them anarchists of the 80s, who wanted to basically show that all religions are false. So they didn't like any religion, and they went about printing all types of blasphemous material from all of the sects of Islam. Shi'ism, Zaydism, Sunnism, they found bizarre things here and there. And this group as well, and how they acquired it we do not know, but they did acquire it, and as soon as this printing was done, this group was disbanded. It was banned. The group that did this was banned. The publication was immediately shut down, but alhamdulillah I managed to get a actual copy. So this is the actual copy. I'll show you. You can see some pictures of it. I'll show them online. So this is a copy of the Rasail al-Hikmah, and of course, I mean, I have read not all of them, and I'm not going to read all of these, these treatises, but I've read enough to understand, get a feel for their theology and what they believe. So, what is this epistles of wisdom as Rasail al-Hikmah? The Rasail al-Hikmah obviously are written in the Arabic language, and they contain exactly 111 epistles, Rasail. Some of them are a page, some of them are 6 or 7 or 8 pages, on average 3-4 pages. And these Rasail, some of them are dated to the month and year, and some of them are not dated. And they are written by 3 or 4 people, including Hamza ibn Ali. So if you can see over here, Hamza ibn Ali is the main one. And you have as well Ismail al-Tamimi, and you have Bahauddin al-Sammuqi. These are the 3 main authors, and all of them lived in the early part of the 5th century, 410, 411, 412, i.e. 1030, 1040, 1050. And primarily these are the letters that they're writing between their groups of people, from Qahira to Lebanon, from Qahira to other people in Qahira. So these are the Rasail that are going back and forth, and they have been preserved, and this preservation forms their main book. And if you read these treatises, you notice a number of things. First and foremost, honestly, this Arabic was obscure. It was very atypical. And of course, I have read plenty of treatises by plenty of the different groups, whether they're Mu'tazili, whether they're Ash'ari, whether they're Salafi, whatever they are. The treatises that we're accustomed to reading, there's a language to use them. And for me, this Arabic was not something I'm accustomed to at all. And I had to reread passages multiple times. And of course, that is because firstly, the language that it uses is highly mystical. Terms used that we're not accustomed to when we study other types of theology. Secondly, there's hardly any quotations of the Quran. Can you believe this is the book of theology where they're talking about belief in God, they're explaining what it is, Tawheed, they're explaining reincarnation, and there's hardly any references. In fact, in my reading of the book, and I've read enough for 50 pages here and there. I've read them through. I could not find a single verse quoted beginning to end. Yes, you do find phrases of the Quran that you would expect any educated Arab at the time to know, but you don't really find an entire quotation per se. I'm sure there might be 1 or 2 in the whole treatise, but I didn't just, in my perusal, I didn't just say, and Allah says this, and of course ask for the name of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. In my reading, I never saw this even once. There might be some mention of him somewhere, but I have not come across his name even once in these treatises that I have read. And these treatises, as I said, they were written between 410 to maybe 450 Hijrah or 445 Hijrah. So that's basically around 1000 CE to 1050 CE, around this time frame. And these treatises are considered to be what are taught by the uqal once you are initiated into the higher level. Once you're initiated into the higher level, and it is these treatises there are some manuscripts of them partially in the Princeton Library here in America that were discovered by a traveler in 1860 something, if I'm not mistaken. There's also a Lebanese emissary that visited, I think, King Louis in France in 17 something, and he gifted him a whole bunch of exotic things. And so of the things he gifted King Louis was an original partial manuscript of Rasail al-Hikmah. And so to this day, in the Bibliothèque of Paris, there is a partial copy of this book. What I have is the entire book, alhamdulillah. All 111 treatises are here, but again, this is not to make it difficult, but it is, if you try to get it, you will see for yourself that it is not something that is easy to do. And maybe one day if I have time, I'll try to read more of this. But to be brutally honest, I am not that enthused to go over and reading all of these pages, because again, these are divided into 6 volumes, and the print is relatively small. 6 volumes and 111 treatises, and each one of them, sometimes the author is unknown, sometimes the date is unknown, sometimes both are unknown, and sometimes both are known. It'll say from Hamza so-and-so to another person so-and-so in the year so-and-so. You asked me about this question, let me explain to you. So let me give you one example, okay? So in this one, which one is this chapter, or the 5th volume, in page 596, you have الرسالة في ذكر المعاد. I was just going over this and I saw this one here. الرسالة في ذكر المعاد. Okay, so a treatise regarding the Ma'ad, which is the day of judgment, the coming back. And he says here a refutation of those who have committed ilhad, have committed atheism or rejection of the faith. And he begins by saying, حروف بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم حدود قائم الدين الحمد لله الذي جعل لأولياء الدين الفلج والغلب وجعل دائرة السوء على من نكس على عقبيه وانقلب وأوجب اللعن والخزي على من خالف الأمر وعن الحق نكب. And on he keeps on going. So and then he says وصلى الله على, upon whom, على الاسم القائم الهادي الإمام. Right? So Allah salatu and salam be upon the Imam, and on, and then he goes, Amma ba'd. So you mentioned to me that in Cairo, somebody from the shuyukh of the deen came along, and he called all of you to believe in something that was blasphemy. And he made this beautiful to your eyes, and he tried to misguide you, and he said to you that once death occurs, then the body shall go to another realm and shall not return to this world, i.e. there's a day of judgment, right? And he mentioned to you that this happens in dreams, and so it's going to happen in the hereafter as well. And so he goes, I am going to refute this claim. So what's he saying here? He is saying a Sunni Shaykh came to you guys, and a Sunni Shaykh claimed that there is a day of judgment, and claimed that the ruh will return to Allah Azza wa Jal and not come back to this world. And so this is a treatise that is meant to refute the Sunni claim of Qiyamah, right? So then he says over here that I don't want to read all of it here, but the argument is actually interesting. It's interesting. Obviously it's a kufr argument. There's no question about that. But where does this here? So he said that, don't you see that people have different strengths and different livelihoods and different lives? Don't you see that this is beyond their control? How would it be fair for somebody to have certain lifestyle and another lifestyle when it's not due to their control? Rather, aql, intellect, demands that this is something they must have done to earn or deserve this, right? So, and he goes on and on. So it's very interesting here. There's not a single verse of the Quran mentioned in this whole. I read this treatise. I read cover to cover. This particular risala here. Number, what number is it? Number 70, I think, right? Risala 70. الرسالة في ذكر المعاد. So this treatise, he doesn't really have any verses of the Quran at all. Not a single verse of the Quran. And he basically says that if you look at the world around you, you find that some people are rich and some people are poor. Some people are born wealthy, some people are born with talent, some people are born without talent. He said, the aql tells you this isn't fair. The only way it would be fair is if they did something themselves in a previous life that then allowed them to come and then occupy this particular level and status. And he goes on. And so he's proving basically in reincarnation. So Hamza ibn Ali, this is a risala from Hamza ibn Ali. Hamza ibn Ali is quite literally saying there is no qiyamah, there is no heaven and hell, there is no ba'th, rather there is reincarnation. And this is a standard point of Druze theology. Now, with this theology, obviously it is self-evident to us as people who believe in the kalima that this group really cannot be considered to be within the ummah at all. There is no udhr bil jahl, there is no ignorance that's taking place here, because there is no Islam such that we excuse them for udhr bil jahl. There is no divine being named Allah in their theology. There is no risala of the Prophet ﷺ that they are affirming constantly. There is no ritual, there is no Quran, there is no identification with Islam. That's the point. They don't even call themselves Muslim. If you were to ask them, they will say we are Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and we are Druze, we are muwahhidun, right? So for them, Islam is like Christianity and Judaism, previous faiths that Allah has revealed, and they have a higher version that they called, the ilm of Tawheed, or we are the people of Tawheed, or some, Amma among them will call themselves Druze as well. And this is because of this, obvious disconnect from our tradition. There has never really been a serious controversy within the ummah that this group cannot be identified as Muslim. And I'm just being academic here. I'm not talking about any type of what is the ruling in terms of violence, whatnot. I'm not preaching anything like this. I'm simply saying we as Muslims have the right to define what is a Muslim. And for us, a Muslim is somebody who believes in Allah and who believes that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger whom we must follow in order to worship Allah. We believe in a divine, and we believe in a human being that taught us how to worship that divine. That is the bare minimum of salvation. If you do not believe in Allah, and or you do not believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam being the Prophet whom Allah sent for us to learn from and to take as a role model, there is no Islam. There's no question there. So while I am somebody who, if you listen to my lectures, I'm somebody who says the bar of salvation is relatively low compared to what various sects, want to make it. And for me, the bar of salvation is, as I said, you believe in Allah, you believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as being the final prophet, you believe in an akhirah and heaven and hell, the basic teachings of Islam. That is, and you live an ethical life. You want to worship Allah based upon the sunnah of the messenger of Allah, and you want Allah to reward you on the day of judgment. That's basically, as long as, in a nutshell, that's basically what is the bar of salvation. So if you have this bar, by and large, you, alhamdulillah, you're Muslim. These guys have none of that. There is no Allah, there is no Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is no hisab, there is no qiyamah, there's no heaven and hell. So, and there's no Islam. I mean, literally the term Islam is not a part of their, vernacular. So there should be really no two opinions about this, and that's why pretty much anybody who has written about them has considered them to be outside the fold of Islam. Ibn Taymiyyah in his Fatawa, volume 35, page 161, he has a short treatise, literally a page and a half about the Druze, and he says, وَهُمْ أَعْظَمُ كُفْرًا مِنَ الْغَالِيَةِ. They are worse in their kufr than even the ghulat of the Shia. And they say that the earth is uncreated, and they have no concept of heaven and hell, and they have no concept of the rituals of Islam, no concept of halal and haram, and they are just as bad as the Qaramita, or even worse. وَهُمْ أَكْفَرُ مِنَ الْيَهُودِ وَالنَّصَارَى وَمُشْرِكِي الْعَرَبِ. And they have more kufr than the Yahud and Nasara, and even the pagans of the Arabs. And this is so true. Even the pagans of the Arabs believed in Allah, and the pagans of the Arabs have some rituals to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but this group is different than that. And Al-Azhar University in 1934, a long time ago, they actually issued a fatwa in which they said this group cannot be considered to be within the fold of Islam, and this is something that everybody understands and knows. Now, final point here, and that is, what are some similarities between the Alawis and Nusayris? If you don't know, by the way, I have a whole talk online, which I also gave because of political realities taking place. Who are the Nusayris? Who are the Alawis? Go listen to that. And I summarized the beliefs of the Nusayris in that group, in that talk. Now I'm doing the Druze, but now that I've done both, let's do a very quick summary. And in that summary, inshallah ta'ala, you will now understand the difference between the Druze and the Nusayris. So let's begin with the similarities. Both the Druze and the Nusayris, they emphasize a hidden meaning, a batin. And they are both secretive. They are taught to withhold core doctrines from outsiders, and oftentimes even their own members are not taught. Even many of the Alawis don't really know Alawi theology, but as for the Druze, they've codified, and they said until the age of 40, you don't even know. Both have some affiliation with Shi'ism. Both hold Ali ibn Abi Talib in a relative high manner. Both believe in transmigration or reincarnation of the soul. Both of them have elements of Gnosticism and Neoplatonic thought. Neither group is proselytizing. They're not calling others to their faith. And both of them have marriage within the faith. By the way, I forgot to mention, Druze don't allow divorce. I forgot to mention that Druze do not allow divorce. Druze do not have circumcision. Druze also frown upon, if not prohibit, polygamy. So they have certain things that are unique to them. So get back to the similarities. Sorry, I forgot to mention this was in the previous section. And the Druze and the Nusayris, both of them are geographically found in the Levant, in Syria and Lebanon. However, Syria has more Alawis and Lebanon has more Druze, okay? But in that region, Druze and Alawis are both there. So these are similarities. What are the differences? Well, first and foremost, this is the most important difference. The Alawis are not linked to Ismailism. The Alawis are linked to 12-er Shi'ism, and the Druze are linked to Fatimid Ismailism. This is the fundamental difference. The Alawis are a breakaway from 12-er Shi'ism. When the 11th Imam died, when Hassan al-Askari died, when the 11th Imam died, at the death of the 11th Imam, there was an entire spectrum of groups that formed, because from our perspective, from the historical perspective, there was no 12th Imam. He never existed. He was never born. This is something the 12ers of our times believe. When the 11th Imam died, he didn't have a son, according to historians, according to everybody else other than 12er Shia. So when the 11th Imam dies without a child, without an heir, what's going to happen? An entire spectrum of groups formed, and two of those groups remained. There's no other group that remained, even though 1,000 years ago there were many groups, but they all fizzled out. Two groups remained. The one of them was taken by the Buwayhid dynasty and made into a mainstream, and then the Safavids made it even more mainstream, and so that is the 12er Shi'ism. Because the Buwayhids and then the Safavids adopted it, because of this, then they actually became a relatively small significant minority within the Ummah, and this is 12er Shi'ism. The other group, known as Alawis or Nusayris, remained small. They were never adopted by a state until the modern land of Syria with Hafiz al-Assad, and he is from the Alawi or the Nusayri branch. So the Alawis tap into 12er Shi'ism, and as for the Druze, they tap into Fatimid Ismailism. This is the most important difference. Another difference is that the Druze are far more radical in their philosophical Neoplatonic monotheistic unity. So the Druze are very much into pure Plotinus, pure concepts of oneness, and that is why they call themselves Muwahhidun. Another difference is that the Druze do embrace a more mythic and incarnationist view of divinity, and the Alawis, the Nusayris. The Nusayris have the divinity of Ali, whereas the Druze have the divinity of Al-Hakim bi Amrillah, even though the Druze also consider Ali to have been one of the vehicles of Tajalli. But when it comes to real connection, the Druze are more mentioning of Al-Hakim, and the Alawis are more mentioning of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So you have a persona that is different. The Druze mention Al-Hakim, even though theoretically Ali was one of the vehicles of Tajalli. Another difference is that the Druze emerged in the 11th century in Egypt, whereas the Alawis emerged in the 9th century in Syria, as I said, right? So the Alawis, or some would say Iraq as well, and they came to Syria. So the original founder of the Alawis was Iraqi, but they made their way to Syria, and then the Druze, the original founder was Egyptian, and then they made their way to Lebanon. Another difference is the sacred text. The Alawis, by and large, don't have any equivalent. There is no actual text, even though there's something called Al-Baqura Sulaymani. I talked a little bit about that in my other talk. As for the Druze, they actually have 111 epistles, that is called Rasail al-Hikmah. And another difference is that the Druze are structured into Uqal and Juhal, whereas there's no such structure amongst the Alawis or the Nusayris. One final difference I'll mention, well, let's say two more differences, and that is that the Druze are by and large tightly knit and isolated from other Muslims and Arabs, and in fact only recently they've opened up and formed alliances with, believe it or not, as we know now, Israel. That's the irony of ironies, right? That's why we're talking and having this library chat. The Druze have always been disconnected from the rest of the world. Only recently they found an ally with Israel, and so now the two of them are teaming up against Arabs and against other Muslims. As for the Nusayris or Alawis, they were isolated for a long period of time. However, recently, with the rise of Hafiz al-Assad in Syria, Hafiz al-Assad started a strategy of attempting to appear mainstream, and so he began forming ties with Sunni clerics and with 12er clerics, and he began visibly praying and mentioning Quran, and his son also pretended or claimed to have this affinity with Islam, and so there was a attempt to mainstream themselves within the Ummah. I would say it failed, but the isolationist attitude of the Druze remains. As for the Alawis or Nusayris, they attempted to, whether they're successful or not, time will tell, but they attempted to ingratiate themselves with the rest of the Ummah, and in fact a lot of times they will call themselves Muslims of an Alawi persuasion. They say we're Muslims and we're Alawi. As for the Druze, they say we are not Muslim, we are Druze. So there is a massive difference between the two, even though of course theologically the both of them are really outside the fold of Islam. There's no question about that, but I'm saying the Druze don't even claim to be. At least the Alawis, many of them, they claim, at least, whether it's for political expediency or not, that's really besides the point. So the point is that though, the Druze and the Nusayris, there is some overlap even theologically and even culturally, and that's why there is a confusion. However, when you go deeper, there is actually no real similarity ethnically and theologically. The two are, even though there's some overlap, but they are completely distinct. In fact, one of the Rasail of the Rasail al-Hikmah, and I was reading this, quite intrigued by it. One of the Rasail is actually a refutation of the Nusayris, right? So he has Ar-Rad al-Nusayrin al-Mulhidin. There's an entire treatise here, right? Ar-Rad al-Nusayrin. So he wants to, and he has all of these vulgar adjectives, that there's a da'i of the Nusayris that has come and he's done this and that. So these guys do not like the Nusayris, and they consider them to be malahida, which is rejectors of God and rejectors of religion. And there's complete, takfir between the two of them. So do not confuse the Druze from the Alawis. They are completely separate and distinct groups. And to conclude, therefore, the Druze are an offshoot, a breakaway of Ismaili Islam, who no longer identify as Muslims. Their theology has little to do with the theology of the Quran, and that is why they do not even quote the Quran. They do not believe in Allah the way that we believe in Him. They believe that the divine or the one manifested Himself in various figures, and the final figure and the most perfect manifestation was via the Fatimid Khalifa al-Hakim bi Amrillah. And with that manifestation, the teachings of the Quran cease to be active. They no longer apply. And because they no longer apply, they're not really, the Quran to them is just like the Bible in the Old Testament and the New Testament. You can look to it for, some wisdoms and reference, but it is not binding on you. And they clearly rejected a heaven and hell that is an actual heaven and hell. They rejected resurrection, and they believe in the transmigration of the soul. They believe in tanasukh al-arwah, where if you do good, you will rise up, and then next life you become one of the uqad. If you do even higher, you rise up even higher, until finally you will finally understand the truth. And when you understand the truth, your soul will be reunited with the one, and in that reunion, that is heaven. That is a state of the mind. That is heaven, and that is the ultimate goal. If that doesn't happen, the other alternative is you wait for the return of Al-Hakim bi Amrillah, and when Al-Hakim bi Amrillah comes back and you are of the righteous Druze, then that will be your heaven, because you will actually have seen the tajalli of God, and so that will be another manifestation of heaven for you. And obviously from our perspective, they have nothing to do with the religion of Islam, and they are one of the groups that we can categorically state, and as I said, from my perspective, these are very few groups that we say this about, the Druze and the Nusayris and the followers of the Qadian person. These are the types of people we say, uncategorically we say, that there's no question that these people are outside the fold of Islam, and they have no relationship with the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why when the Ummah has rejected them and the modern nation state of Israel has adopted them, this is why there's such a strong political affinity, and this is why the Druze have been given power in Israel, and they like to have those relationships and call upon them against their against their fellow Arabs, because they're still Arab. They speak Arabic, they identify as Arabs, but their loyalties are not with the Arabs or with the Muslim Ummah. And I hope that that was of some benefit about the reality of the Druze. And with this we come to the conclusion of this library chat. Wa jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.